Hey guys, welcome back. So we need to continue on in our unit on the Progressive Era and industrialization. The first thing that I want to do is go over some review from the first half of Unit 2. So again, if you guys are looking at these and you're finding that it's difficult for you to remember, you might want to go back and review a lot of these terms. So for number one, what is social Darwinism? Should remember that social Darwinism is the belief that natural selection applies to society. So only the strongest countries are meant to dominate weaker ones. Only the strongest businesses are meant to survive in the free market. Only the strongest people are meant to enslave or mistreat others, right? For number two, what does laissez-faire mean? Laissez-faire literally means hands off. And this is when businesses are able to operate without any sort of government interference whatsoever. So during the industrial period, we know that businesses were able to do whatever they wanted without any sort of government regulation put on them whatsoever. Number three, what are nativists and what did they believe? A nativist is a native-born American, so just somebody that's born in the country, not a Native American, just somebody that's born here that fears or distrusts foreigners. These people believe that foreigners will steal American jobs and that they will bring crime and poverty into this country. Number four, who lived in tenements and what were they like? Well, if you guys remember from when we looked at how the other half lives, tenements were crowded, dirty, cramped, just yucky apartment buildings that were found in cities. And the working class had to work here during the industrial period. Many of those people were actually immigrants. And so, if you remember from how the other half lives, there was a lot of disease, there wasn't running water, they didn't have electricity. You had many, many people cramped in a single room. They were very just depressed places to live. Number five, what does it mean to reform? Reform means to change for the better. Number six, what is suffrage? Suffrage is the right to vote in political elections. Number seven, why did women model their Declaration of Sentiments after the Declaration of Independence? Well, the reason for this was because the Declaration of Independence stated that the colonists had rights, inalienable rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And then they listed all of their grievances against the king. Well, women decided that that was a great comparison to make. So, in their Declaration of Sentiments, they say all men and women are created equal, and here are their grievances. And they go on to list things such as the fact that they can't vote, the fact that they aren't equal under the law or in education. So, it's a really, really smart comparison to make because it's kind of asking the question of like, well, if it wasn't okay to not give you your rights, why is it okay to not give us our rights? And then number eight, how did women's suffrage eventually become legal? Well, if you remember from the lecture I posted yesterday, 3/4 of the states are required in order to pass an amendment. Now, it was really, really close, and the vote came down to one senator from Tennessee who was 23 years old, and he is the one that voted yes, even though he personally did not agree with it. The reason he said yes was because his mother told him to. And so, women gained the right to vote with the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States in 1920. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. So today we're going to be talking about Teddy Roosevelt. He is one of the most famous Progressive Era presidents for all of his work with regard to business and the environment. So Teddy Roosevelt himself was known as kind of like this wild card type character. And he was young, he was energetic, and he was very, very liberal. Now, he was William McKinley's vice president, and William McKinley chose Roosevelt because he thought that he would get more votes because he could be as moderate as he wants or as, conservative as he wants, But then he has Teddy Roosevelt over here who's going to appease those voters. So he thought that he would get all the votes because he would be, appeasing a lot of different people because he's more conservative and Teddy Roosevelt's more liberal. But this is all kind of blown out of the water because McKinley is shot and Roosevelt has to take over. And it gives him power as the president to push forth a lot of his reforms. So he was only 42 years old when he became president, and most presidents before him had a very hands-off approach to the position. They didn't really do much. But Teddy Roosevelt wasn't like that. He was actually very, very active and very hands-on. So they called his platform the bully pulpit because he was very powerful, he was very aggressive, and he would campaign for support for his policies. He was very, very energetic. Teddy Roosevelt is really just a force to be reckoned with. So he called his policies the square deal. And the reason why it's called the square deal is because he was trying to balance out the interests of business people, laborers, and consumers. He wanted to make sure that everybody was being represented with the policies that he wanted to make. So one of the most important laws that we will associate with Teddy Roosevelt is the Sherman Antitrust Act. This is a very important law that makes it illegal for companies to form trusts or monopolies because those are bad for the consumer. So, how are monopolies bad for consumers? Well, the reason for this is because if there isn't competition, prices will be artificially high. So an example I like to give is if you ever see two gas stations across the street from one another, you'll notice that usually one of them is 1/10 of a cent less than the other one. And so people will go to that one because they think to themselves, like, well, that's cheaper, so I'm going to go there. Likewise, when you go to the store and you look at all the different types of ice cream that are available to you, some are under $2, some are $6. There's a wide variety of brands and prices. But with a monopoly, you don't have choices. And if you don't have choices, you're forced to just pay whatever the price is for that good or service that you're seeking. So that is why monopolies are bad for consumers. When companies are competing for your business, they will push prices low so that they can get you to buy from them. Teddy Roosevelt recognizes this and he decides that he's going to take on big business all by himself. He becomes known as the trust buster. They call him the trust buster because he starts using the Sherman Antitrust Act to sue a number of companies for violating the antitrust. And you know what? He winds up winning. Now, the Roosevelt administration files dozens upon dozens upon dozens of lawsuits against monopolies and trusts that were not in the best interest of the public. And he is very successful because Teddy Roosevelt knows that in order for things to be good for the consumer, for prices to be kept low, for, our economy to function well, people have to be able to pick between different companies. You cannot just have monopoly after monopoly after monopoly. And that's what had been happening during the Industrial Revolution. That's why certain people became extremely rich and other businesses were just shoved out of the way. If you look at these pictures here, you can see that Teddy Roosevelt was a very popular subject for many political cartoons during this era. They depict him as, this hero of the American people, busting up these trusts, wrestling with them on the wrestling mat as America watches on. My favorite one ever is this picture on the left that says "Jujitsu'd." Like the best pun I've ever heard. And so it shows Teddy Roosevelt punching up a trust and "Jujitsu'd." I love it. I absolutely love it. This is also an excellent one where he's holding a stick that says, "Obey the laws." And he is showing that he is not afraid to use his stick. And his stick in this case is going to be the Sherman Antitrust Act. He's ready to just whack businesses with it. Now, in addition to being heavily interested in, consumer protection, he is also very much concerned with the environment. So, in the mid to late 19th century, during the Industrial Revolution, natural resources were being used all willy nilly, especially in the West, and people weren't thinking anything of it because people just thought that resources were never ending. So, it never occurred to them to use them wisely or try to conserve the environment in any way. And so, even when you guys think back to the jungle that we read, that whole paragraph about Bubbly Creek, people didn't care about the environment. They were using resources, dumping waste, just destroying the earth. Now, conservation is where you take resources and you use them slowly and wisely so that you have more resources to use in the future. Now, conservation is thought of being one of the major achievements of the Roosevelt era because he takes a lot of land that was in the United States with things like timber, important natural resource, and he makes sure that it isn't being used quite so willy-nilly, right? So that there's a little bit left over, at least for, future years to come. Now, I want to make sure that you guys understand that there is a difference between conservation and preservation. So conservation is where you are using a resource wisely. So you're divvying it out so that there's little bit that's getting used at a time so that in the future there are still some resources left to use. Preservation is where you are not using it at all. So the United States has a Bureau of Land Management that dictates when certain resources can get used. So when certain, patches of forest can, be developed. But no use, preservation, means that it's completely off limits. You can't touch it at all. And for example, that would be like our national parks. You can't go into a national park and start hunting. You can't go into a national park and chop down a tree. That land is to be left completely untouched. No use. Okay, so this is where I want to stop for today. Please complete your assignment for Friday. And if you guys have any questions, you of course can let me know. I apologize for all the weird cuts in this. I had to work around the bells, and so I know that there are some odd random cuts in this, but I try to do my best. Anyways, I'll see you guys soon. Have a great day.